Kash Patel faces Jimmy Kimmel's insults. His stupid career ended. Soon after the lights flared, the theme music blared, and the audience clapped on cue. It was just another Tuesday night at Jimmy Kimmel Live, but tonight's guest was not a movie star or pop singer, it was Kash Patel. Yes, that Kash Patel, former national security aide, frequent target of media mockery, and now apparently fodder for Jimmy's monologue. Please welcome a man who once advised Trump and now probably advises himself in front of a mirror, Jimmy quipped, flashing his signature grin. The crowd chuckled obediently. Kash walked on stage in a charcoal suit, not flashy, not defensive, just calm. Too calm for Kimmel's liking. They shook hands. Jimmy's grip was tight. Kash's was effortless. The tension didn't crackle, it hummed under the surface like a frequency only dogs and Twitter trolls could hear. So Jimmy began, you were once a lawyer, right? Like actual law school, not YouTube university. The audience laughed on cue again. Kash didn't blink. Yes, he said smoothly. And I passed the bar on my first try. Yourself. Jimmy's grin faltered for a millisecond. Well, I didn't go into law, I went into comedy. Clearly the better paying field. Depends on who's paying you, Kash replied. No smile, just that eerie calm. The first wave of tweets began surfacing. Some cheered Kash for the comeback. Others called him smug. But none could look away. Then, Jimmy leaned in for the jab he had saved for mid-segment. You know, there's been some talk, rumors really, that your academic record isn't exactly, shall we say, Supreme Court worthy. Kash tilted his head. I wasn't aware we were auditioning for that bench. Jimmy pressed on, voice now oozing faux curiosity. Would you be willing, for transparency's sake, to share your full academic record? Just so people know you're not winging it with national security? There it was. The punch he'd been winding up since the opening joke. The room tensed. Even the stage manager stopped mid-cue. Kash didn't flinch. He gently placed his water bottle on the table and leaned forward. You want me to show you my grades? He said, each word deliberate because you think reading a transcript proves someone's integrity. Jimmy blinked. The crowd was silent now. Somewhere backstage, a producer whispered, he's not taking the bait. Kash continued. You know what proves integrity, Jimmy. Doing your job while the country sets itself on fire and you're being called a traitor for trying to put it out. But sure, let's talk about who got a B in torts. A few soft claps erupted. They weren't from the laugh track. Jimmy tried to regain footing. Come on, it's just a little academic transparency. If there's nothing to hide... If you're so obsessed with school, Kash cut in, maybe we should start with yours. What'd you major in, punchlines or performative outrage? More claps. A sharp whistle from the upper row, then came the twist. Jimmy, half chuckling, waved to the wings. Well, you'll be happy to know we did our homework. We reached out to someone who claims to know your college record intimately. Let's bring him out. Cue dramatic pause. Out walked a silver-haired man with a leather folder. Slow, deliberate, like a judge entering a room where justice had just been mocked. Jimmy blinked twice. This wasn't a bit. The man reached center stage and extended a hand not to Jimmy but to Kash. Mr. Patel. Been a long time. Kash stood. No handshake this time, just a nod of respect. Jimmy tried to laugh it off. And you are... The man spoke into the mic with the tone of a funeral announcement. Professor William Hart, former dean of the University of Texas School of Law. I taught Mr. Patel, and I'm here to correct the record. The crowd went dead silent. Jimmy froze, mouth half open. Kash took his seat again, hands folded. Mr. Kimmel, Professor Hart continued, you wanted to embarrass someone on national television using hearsay. Allow me to introduce evidence instead. He opened the folder and held up a yellowed document. This, he said, is Mr. Patel's final paper, Equal Under Law, Unequal in Practice. It won the Federal Civil Rights Essay Competition in 2013. He wrote it while his father was recovering from surgery and refused an extension. Said, and I quote, if I can't defend justice under pressure, I don't deserve to practice it. You could have heard a pin drop. Jimmy shifted in his chair. Well, Professor Hart wasn't finished. I also taught Mr. Kimmel's cousin, actually. Lovely girl, mediocre GPA, never made it past evidence. The audience gasped. Then they laughed. Not the laugh track, Not nervous laughter. Real laughter. Jimmy raised his hands in surrender. Okay, you've made your point. But the point wasn't made by him, and the segment wasn't over yet. Kash Patel stood under the glaring studio lights of Jimmy Kimmel. Live the audience's laughter fading into a strange, almost suspicious silence. The night had begun with canned jokes, pre-approved applause signs, and Jimmy's usual self-satisfied smirk. But things had taken a turn, one that Kimmel clearly hadn't scripted. So, Kash, Jimmy leaned forward, flipping through a stack of cue cards like he was searching for a punchline he had forgotten to rehearse. Do you think people should know where their lawmakers really stand? Say academically, I mean, we wouldn't want someone writing laws who couldn't pass middle school civics, right? The audience chuckled, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. Kash Patel didn't flinch. He tapped his index finger slowly on the desk, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled slowly, dangerously. Sure, Jimmy, but I assume you're applying that standard to yourself, right? Or are jokes exempt from scrutiny? The crowd let out an ooh that rippled through the room like an incoming storm. Jimmy's eyes narrowed. I'm not running for office. Exactly, Kash replied, calm as a bomb waiting to go off. But you are trying to influence how millions think. And if that's not more dangerous than a single vote in Congress, I don't know what is. Silence. Jimmy tried to pivot his voice, losing its mockery and shifting into something that smelled like nervousness. Just saying, if someone's out here claiming to fight for the truth, we should at least know if they ever failed a test, right? Right, Kash said. So let's test you right now. He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila folder. The audience murmured. Jimmy looked at it like it might bite him. This, Kash continued, is a little breakdown of your donation records. See, while you were mocking politicians who supposedly take money from dark sources, you quietly donated to several PACs connected to, oh look, Silicon Valley billionaires and some media conglomerates you pretend to hate on air. The screen behind them suddenly lit up. Not comedy, a spreadsheet. Jimmy's team scrambled, but it was too late. The graphic stayed, names, dates, amounts, logos. Where'd you get that? Jimmy asked the showman, mask slipping. Public records, you know those things journalists used to check before becoming late-night clowns. The audience gasped, and a few scattered claps emerged, likely from the confused or rebellious. Jimmy laughed nervously. This is supposed to be a comedy show, Kash. Right. And I'm laughing at the irony of being lectured on transparency by a man who hides behind punchlines. Producer red lights flashed. The segment was off script. The teleprompter blinked empty. Kash leaned in. But I'm not done. See, before coming here, I got a message from someone you probably forgot, Professor William Hart. Ring a bell. Jimmy blinked. Didn't think so. He taught both of us Jimmy. Law school, constitutional theory. You dropped out, remember, called the syllabus too dry. The audience erupted. Not with laughter. This was the wrong kind of roast. I didn't drop out. Sure you didn't. You just withdrew for creative pursuits. Sounded better in interviews. The silence returned. Awkward. Heavy. But Kash wasn't here for comfort. Now, he said, pushing the folder toward Jimmy, I'm not asking for your grades. I'm asking if you're ready to admit that you've built a career mocking people for failing tests you never dared to take. Jimmy looked at the camera, his smirk trying to return but failing like a glitchy graphic. We'll be right back, he muttered. But they didn't cut to commercial. Someone in the control room had frozen, or maybe they were just listening. Kash sat back in his chair, folding his arms. No rush, I'll wait. And the audience, now wide-eyed and strangely quiet for a comedy show, waited too. The silence hung like a dropped curtain. For a moment, Jimmy Kimmel just stared at the cue card in his hand, pretending to read something that wasn't there. A low cough came from the audience. A crew member gestured madly behind a camera. Nothing moved on screen. The show had slipped out of the entertainment lane and was barreling toward a full-on reckoning. Kash Patel leaned back, comfortable in the tension. Jimmy finally chuckled. You done with your TED Talk, Kash? Or should I get the chalkboard and let you diagram my sins? Funny you mentioned diagrams, Kash replied. Because I brought one. The screen behind them flickered again, this time a flowchart. At the top, public persona Jimmy Kimmel. Below it, boxes linked with arrows, sponsors, political donations, joke topics, silence on certain scandals, conveniently timed monologues. The chart wasn't flashy, but it was surgical. "See this," Kash said. "This is what hypocrisy looks like with a graphics team." Jimmy squinted. "Did you seriously bring a presentation to a comedy show?" "You invited me," Kash said, "and I'm just presenting what you didn't prepare for." The audience was divided now, half frozen, half grinning with a kind of vicarious thrill. For once, the smug host was not in control, and viewers at home knew it. From the shadows of the studio, someone cleared their throat. Not a plant, not a heckler, a voice. "He's got a point." Jimmy looked up, startled. That voice came from the crowd. A man stood up, early 40s, gray sweater, holding a law textbook. "I was in Hart's class, too," the man said. "Jimmy dropped out the week after our first mock trial, said it was all too procedural." Jimmy pointed a finger. "Uh-oh. All right, now we're just pulling random dudes off the street." "Random dudes who still have the emails," the man replied. He sat back down. The murmurs rose. Someone in the back yelled, "Where's the punchline now, Jimmy?" Another voice, "Let him finish, Patel." Jimmy held up his hands. "This isn't a town hall, it's a talk show. We do jokes." "Then tell one," Kash snapped, "because so far the only joke here is that you pretend to be a moral compass for millions while you're ducking your own past like it's a subpoena." Laughter. Real laughter. From people who weren't supposed to be laughing. A producer's voice rang out from the booth. "We need a break," but the cameras didn't cut. One of the operators locked eyes with Kash and nodded ever so slightly. Someone was going off script on purpose. Kash leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "I'm not trying to bury you, Jimmy. I'm trying to remind people that power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears a grin and hides behind irony." Jimmy's tone sharpened. "Are you accusing me of brainwashing people with comedy? I'm accusing you of giving permission to mock, dismiss, ignore, all while acting above the fray." A teenage girl in the front row raised her hand. "This isn't school," Jimmy said. "It should be," she replied, "because I just learned more in 10 minutes than in 4 years of watching you." A second ripple of gasps. Jimmy stood up. "All right, that's enough. You made your point. This isn't journalism hour. We'll go to commercial." Kash didn't move. "You're not used to being challenged, are you?" Jimmy's face tightened. "You want to be the hero here? Go ahead. But just remember, even heroes fall." "Then I'll fall standing," Kash said. "Unlike you, who's been kneeling to network executives your whole career." And then, as if conjured by destiny or brilliant timing, the studio door opened. In walked a tall man, cane in hand, silver hair neatly combed, carrying a worn-out leather folder. Professor William Hart. Gasps. Audible gasps. Jimmy froze. "No. Way." "Yes, way," Hart said, walking down the steps like a judge entering court. "And you're right, Mr. Kimmel. Even heroes fall. But so do frauds." The stage lights were dimmer now, as if even the spotlight sensed the shift in energy. Kimmel's confident smirk had faltered, and Kash Patel, still poised, leaned ever so slightly forward, elbows on the polished desk, fingers intertwined. Enter Professor William Hart, not with fanfare but friction. The audience didn't cheer, they gasped. A few recognized him, most Googled him instantly. The former dean of law at the University of Texas walked in with a cane, a slow gait, and a thicker presence than all the cue cards Jimmy Kimmel had ever relied on. Jimmy, ever the showman, adjusted his tie. "Well, this is unexpected," he said, trying to sprinkle humor over the embers of his burned credibility. Professor Hart didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "I came to clarify something, Jimmy. Not because it's fun, because it's overdue." Kash didn't move, but the glint in his eye sharpened. "I taught law for 37 years, Hart began, voice firm. "And in those decades I learned a simple truth. Showmanship can carry a joke, but only substance can carry justice." The audience was silent. Somewhere backstage, a producer signaled for a commercial break, but the control room stayed frozen. No one dared cut. Mr. Kimmel Hart continued. "You made light of a man's record, asked about his credentials, questioned if he earned his place." Kimmel opened his mouth but wisely closed it. "So, let's talk about earning." Hart held up a document, not flashy, not framed. A worn, photocopied essay titled Counterterrorism and Constitutional Fracture, the Kash Patel Brief. gasps. The crowd's curiosity leaned forward like an incoming tide, written during a semester where Mr. Patel was managing coursework, financial stress, and yes, clerking for a federal judge. Hart looked straight at Jimmy. No extensions. No excuses. Kimmel squirmed. The suit started to feel tighter. Professor Hart laid the paper on the desk between them. This essay won the National Law Student Award for Constitutional Insight in 2007. It's been cited in 5 Supreme Court briefs, and you just asked its author to prove he deserved a seat at your table. The audience was no longer laughing. They were listening. Hart wasn't finished. Mr. Kimmel, you often hide behind punchlines, but fairness isn't a sketch. It's a structure. And you tried to knock it down with applause signs. Jimmy managed a grin, weak and wavering. Look, Professor, this is TV. We tease, we poke, he said. TV, Hart snapped, is also where people learn. And when they hear mockery instead of merit, they believe that's the truth. Kash finally spoke. Jimmy, you didn't ask me for a debate. You called for a performance. But you got substance, and now you're choking on it. That line hit harder than any monologue. Somewhere in the audience, a young law student stood up. No cue, no camera prompt. I'm here because I thought this was satire, she said. Turns out the satire is how seriously people take clowns over scholars. Roar. Not laughter. Applause. Kimmel didn't respond. He couldn't. A man made for punchlines had just been punched by facts. Backstage, a producer whispered, "We can't spin this." Hart turned to Kash. You never needed to answer. Because sometimes the best rebuttal is letting others reveal themselves. Kash nodded. Not proud, not smug, just done. As the studio lights began to dim into a forced fade-out, Jimmy cleared his throat. Well, folks, he muttered, that's all the time we have tonight. But no one clapped. Even the applause sign stayed off. Fade to silence. The next morning, the headlines weren't funny. Kimmel gets schooled, read the front page of the Daily Signal. Punchline becomes footnote, quipped another. But none hit as hard as a viral screenshot from the show, shared millions of times, Professor Hart standing firm, Kash Patel unmoved, Jimmy Kimmel slumped. Captioned, truth doesn't need applause. By noon, clips from the previous night had already shattered viewing records. Twitter was ablaze with dueling hashtags, Kash crushed Kimmel, Jow's comedy, or Keywordus, Hart for truth. Even Reddit had exploded into factions. The subreddit R Political Humor was divided, half mocking Kimmel, half awkwardly trying to meme their way around it. Kimmel's staff was in damage control mode. A leaked email from a junior producer read, "We thought it was going to be a 5-minute roast, not a live tribunal." By afternoon, conservative commentators pounced. Ben Shapiro dissected the segment frame by frame. Candace Owens hosted a Twitter space titled When Clowns Meet Class. Even Bill Maher, not known for kindness toward conservatives, tweeted, "Oof, that wasn't a roast. That was a reckoning." Kash. He didn't tweet, he didn't go live, no interviews, no told you so press run. Instead, he posted a single line on his Truth Social account, The Truth Ages Well. That night, Tucker Carlson opened his monologue with a still from the show. Ladies and gentlemen, when you invite a lawyer to a circus, don't be shocked when he writes a better script. But the most unexpected reaction came from academia. Law professors across the country began assigning the Kash Patel brief in their syllabi. The University of Chicago held a last-minute panel when public discourse fails the role of legal integrity on air. The panel sold out in an hour. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel returned to his studio the next evening, this time less jazz hands, more clenched jaw. I want to start by saying last night was not my finest hour, he said, staring into the camera. I underestimated my guest. I mistook silence for lack of substance. And to Mr. Patel, if you're watching, I heard you loud and clear. It was an apology. Sort of. It had the posture, not the soul. The audience clapped, but the applause felt like a scheduled obligation. Kimmel continued with his usual jokes, but the laughs came slower, flatter. The studio felt off, like a party thrown after a funeral. Back in Washington, Representative Elise Stefanik referenced the incident during a press briefing. Maybe instead of mocking conservatives, the late-night elite should start listening. Last night's segment proved that intellect doesn't need a laugh track. Even the New York Times, often cautious in its wording, published a column titled Late Night Lessons When Entertainment Collides with Ethics. A week later, Jimmy was still reeling. Ratings had dipped not drastically, but noticeably. A survey by The Hollywood Reporter showed 42% of viewers felt less trust in Kimmel's judgment. One executive anonymously confessed, "Turns out clowns aren't immune to getting pied in the face." But the impact wasn't just limited to viewership. Young lawyers and political hopefuls started quoting Professor Hart's line in speeches, TikToks, and even wedding toasts. Showmanship can carry a joke, but only substance can carry justice. And Kash Patel, he went back to doing what he always did quietly, precisely without the need for viral vindication. Yet his inbox was flooded with messages from students, veterans, and viewers across political lines. One message, handwritten, read, "Dear Mr. Patel, I'm a first-year law student who watched you on that stage. I was losing faith in the legal system. But seeing you stand silently while the truth spoke for you, it reminded me why I started this path. Thank you for not shouting." No name, just initials. J.T. Kash folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. Not for display, just for memory. At Columbia, a professor started her lecture with a strange new ritual. She'd place a blank notebook on the podium. When asked why, she answered simply, "Because silence writes the loudest lessons." 1 week after the show, NPR aired a special segment titled "From Mockery to Memory, the Night Late Night Got Serious." In it, a clip from Professor Hart's statement played in full. You tried to knock it down with applause signs. The host paused. And yet it was the silence afterward that said everything. The story wasn't just about Kash, or Hart, or even Jimmy. It became something more. A national moment where satire was stripped bare and integrity sat quietly in the chair usually reserved for punchlines. And for once, the spotlight didn't make anyone perform. It just revealed who had been real all along. The air had shifted. What started as late-night comedy had become a courtroom of public opinion. Studio lights still burned above the Kimmel set, but the laughter had long dried up. What remained now was a nation watching with rapt attention. Kimmel, no longer the smirking host behind a mahogany desk, had become the face of a very public reckoning. Meanwhile, Kash Patel, calm, unflinching, had unexpectedly become a kind of folk hero for the disenchanted, the skeptical, the quietly infuriated. By Tuesday morning, the segment between Kash and Kimmel had amassed over 38 million views across platforms. TikTok edits set to dramatic orchestral swells went viral. Twitter threads analyzed every eyebrow raise, every sharp intake of breath, every seemingly insignificant pause in Kash's responses. Reddit was a minefield, a circus, and a temple all at once. Subreddits exploded R political comedy, R Kimmel melt, R Kash clapped back. Kimmel's team attempted damage control. They released an edited version of the segment on their official YouTube channel titled Tough Questions, Honest Answers. The internet wasn't buying it. The edits were obvious. Kash's rebuttals cut short, the audience reactions dampened, and Professor William Hart's sudden walk-on edited out entirely. This only fueled the fire. Side-by-side comparison clips flooded social media. "What are they hiding?" became a trending hashtag. Meanwhile, Kash did something no one expected, nothing. No press tour, no celebratory threads, no smug interviews. He returned to Capitol Hill, appeared in a subcommittee hearing on cybersecurity policy, and said absolutely nothing about the Kimmel debacle. When pressed by a curious reporter outside the building, he simply said, "I was invited to answer questions. I answered them." That silence. It spoke louder than Kimmel's 4-minute monologue defending himself on the next night's show, which awkwardly ended with a forced laugh track and a weak punchline. Turns out, if you throw a rock at a wasp nest, the wasp might be a lawyer. Ratings for Kimmel dropped by 12% over the next 3 episodes. ABC issued no comment, but internally there was panic. Leaked memos revealed a network exec wrote, "We underestimated the crossover between comedy and credibility." Kash's former law professor, now affectionately dubbed Professor Clapback, on Twitter received interview requests from every major network. He declined all. Instead, he published a short op-ed in The Atlantic, "Why Silence Sometimes Wins." The piece became required reading in freshman rhetoric classes across 5 universities within a week. Even stranger copies of Kash's thesis, yes, the one Kimmel mocked, sold out in limited academic printings. The title, structural integrity legal frameworks, and the collapse of bias. Amazon listings shot up. Used law students dug out old PDF versions and shared them in Dropbox folders titled things like Actually Smart Stuff. In a striking twist of generational irony, meme pages turned Kash into a reluctant icon. One showed him holding a coffee mug superimposed with the caption, "Say it with a smile, say it with receipts." Meanwhile, grassroots organizers began a campaign titled Let Them Speak, advocating for educational institutions to allow more real-life testimony during academic hearings. The campaign used stills from the Kimmel segment, especially the moment Professor Hart calmly placed the thesis down in front of the host's desk. No dialogue, just that action. In classrooms and dorm lounges, debates raged not about partisan politics, but about what it meant to deserve a platform. Somehow, the fight between a late-night host and a former federal prosecutor had turned into a philosophical reflection of meritocracy. The final AAA student-led resolution at Columbia University, calling for live televised debates between public figures and policymakers with open fact-checking. If a late-night comedian can try to embarrass a federal prosecutor, one student senator wrote, then why not make the whole thing transparent? Kimmel's next special, previously titled Late Night Justice, was quietly renamed Observational Humor. The promos dropped the line, no topic too hot. The irony was not lost. As for Kash Patel, he didn't return to Kimmel. He didn't need to. The closing clip of the entire saga became a 13-second silence from the original segment. No music, no audience sound. Just Kash staring expressionless while Kimmel stammered through a defensive pivot. That clip was played at the end of a Harvard symposium titled Silence and Power, the New Language of Political Response. The final voice belonged to Professor Hart in a follow-up piece in The New Yorker. In a time where every word is commodified, the rarest currency is still dignity. And with that, the segment ended not with applause, but understanding. The kind that doesn't ask for more. Fade to black.